How's everybody doing? Everybody's excited for this new Hugo conference. I'm thrilled to be a part of the first one. So thank you, Mike, for having me.
Of course.
Um, I'd like to start out by telling everybody a little bit about me and my background. Um, I've been developing websites for probably the past 15 years. I started out actually in college in a call center, believe it or not, and then worked for a couple lead generation companies, and then branched out and started my own business. And I've been doing that for about 10 years. So I provide marketing for small to medium-sized businesses. And I fell into Hugo just because I was using WordPress like probably many of you. And, my site started breaking, the plugins would break, the templates would break. And a colleague of mine referred me he said, you should really check out Hugo. I think it's perfect for what you do in your business for small to medium-sized businesses. And so I checked it out, and sure enough, I mean, it's the best solution I've found in terms of speed and security for small to medium-sized businesses, even large businesses. I'm really novice at this. I've only been doing this, like he said, since 2020. So I've learned a lot through the conference, and I really appreciate everybody that's participated in the conference. I think that this is a great step moving forward. And so some of the reasons why I chose Hugo is I thought it was really interesting. The web takes up a lot of energy. And so if you can build a site that's not only fast, more secure, but it also uses less megabytes. I mean, the average site is well over 1 megabyte. And so if you can create sites where, you're under 200 kilobytes, what does that mean for energy? That means that you can save a ton of energy. It's a greener solution. It's more efficient. It's overall a completely better solution than I think what we currently have out there. They're saying that's 75% of all cell phone users have a 2G or 3G connection. So that's why having a small website really matters. And that's why page speed matters. And page speed's a metric that's given out by Google. And what it basically does is it shows you how fast your website is for people all around the world, where how fast is it loading and is it being effective? Having a quick loading website increases conversion just across the board. It's why it's so important. Especially like if you have a big e-commerce site, you live and die by how quick your site can load. And so Hugo provides that option. And I think that there's a lot of great tools that Hugo has to increase the speed of your site. Recently, I follow a lot of the websites online, a lot of the major ones, and I look at their page speeds. And I saw that Amazon was one of the biggest winners in the last Google algorithm update. And what I had noticed is when I originally looked about 2 years ago, their page speed score was around, I would say like 76. And when I go on and look at it now, I mean, it's so much higher. It loads so much quicker. And it just makes sense. I think it's a better user experience for people because it's quicker. And, that's, I would say, the most number one thing in bounce rate. If someone gets to your site and it's taking longer than just a second to load, they're going to be bouncing off at a higher rate, an exponential rate, than if they get to the site and it loads almost instantly. So with that, like, we're going to get into perfect lighthouse scores. So let me get.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing a crazy stat from Amazon where for each, I think it's like each second, maybe each 100 milliseconds, they lose X amount of dollars. Yeah, for load, like they can really put a dollar figure on that, and that's why it's so incredibly important for them to load those pages quickly. It costs them money if they don't.
I mean, I can't agree more, you know, and like, even for me, you know, it's small to medium-sized businesses, but it's crucial for even me for the sites to be quick. And I just also think that we can make a better product where it's, you know, the most efficient. It's the least amount of kilobytes. It's the least amount of requests that you're putting on the DOM. It's just more efficient. And I'll get into that right now, so this is the site that I had built. Anybody can go to it. It's perfectlighthousescores.com. I have it hosted up on GitHub. I can provide the link in the chat. And basically, you know, I spent the last week going over and making this site and trying to get perfect lighthouse scores on it. And so some of the results I'll show you. So it's an Easter egg that Google has where if you achieve perfect lighthouse scores, it gives you fireworks. So I thought that the first time I saw that, I thought that was really, really cool because, you know, it was something that I don't think I hadn't looked on the web, but I hadn't seen it anywhere. Now since looking, I've seen it in a couple of places, but I think it's a true achievement of performance. It's not just, you know, in performance, it's in all of the four aspects: performance, accessibility, best practices, SEO. And you can see that this site, you know, it's more than just like a basic site where there's just text on it. And, you know, that's what I wanted to show to people was you can build, you know, a normal site where it can load extremely fast. Having your site load in a second that's where you want to be. And so let's see. And then so there's a couple different ways you can look at performance. You can look at it from mobile, and that's actually what I did here. So this is the mobile performance result. And so there's also a desktop performance result. And basically it runs the site as if it were being loaded on desktop. But if anybody knows, you know, Google, the main thing that you want to focus on is mobile first. The faster your site, the majority of people are going to be visiting your site from mobile. And, you know, that's really where you want to shine. But having both show up well, I think it really means that the site is fundamentally set up well. And with that, it performs, it just performs. And that's the main thing. I will go into exactly how I was able to do that, what types of things that I've changed. But I can show you a couple other reports. GT metrics, I mean, it uses Lighthouse, but it shows that the scores are very good. Pingdom, this shows that, you know, the site's under 200 kilobytes. Which is a major reason why it loads so quickly. There's also in Google Lighthouse, there's a thing where it's looking for CSP cross-scripting or content security headers. And so this is another thing that I was able to achieve, was to have extremely good security on the website, which is super important. Also in Mozilla Observatory, it scores an A+. And so I'll show how exactly I was able to do that. So let's break into the template. Okay. So the things that I think that are the biggest, oh, sorry, I don't see.
Yeah, we're still seeing the browser right now.
Yeah.
Possibly might need to reshare your screen.
Look, sorry.
Just while you're figuring that out, one thing on the speed, especially for small and medium businesses, is it's also the perception of that business. If the website loads very slowly, then as a user, you're going to assume, okay, maybe their support or their customer service isn't going to be very good. Whereas if it loads quickly, suddenly you're like, oh, okay, they're going to be really responsive to me right from the get-go. It's part of the brand. Yeah. So
Yeah, I completely agree. So like I was saying, the things I find to be the most important for the biggest gains you can get is properly sizing images. And it's really interesting how Hugo has that set up. You can use Hugo to not only properly size your images, but you can put them in next generation formats. And why that's important is it serves a smaller image file and it loads quicker in the browsers. So if we go to, let's see, the banner image, I'll show, or actually we'll go to, so I actually have this running through a partial, which I was a little bit disappointed because what I wanted to do was have the partial where it processed every image, but I was only able to set it up for one. And so when I process this partial, it sends it through to here. And basically what this does is it resizes the image into source sets where it'll set up a bunch of different sizes for the browser to choose, where it'll produce the image that's going to be the fastest for the device that it's showing. So this runs through and creates basically an image where it's got source set for a bunch of different options for the browser, and then it links to the specific image. So it's basically optimizing the image where it's optimizing it for all devices where it's going to be the most efficient. And so in that, it increases page speed. And so it's doing it through Hugo's image processing, which I think is one of the most amazing things about Hugo. So what I've done is I've used this a couple times, not the full image with source sets, but I've used Hugo's image processing. Like for right here, I'm telling Hugo to grab this image in the assets directory, and it is processing it to fit this specific size and width. So it goes in and then it puts it into WebP, and it can do a lot of the legwork for you. I've built a couple of different sites where I think that image sizing, next gen images, they're the biggest thing that you will need to do in order to make your website run faster. Also, using SVG images for your logo really shrinks down the size of the file that's being served. The next thing that I think that basically sorry, I'm looking for it. Another thing is just having no JavaScript in your code. It's sometimes difficult to do. A lot of websites use tons and tons of JavaScript, and it really puts an extra load on load time. And so, for example, there's a lot of different things like a menu where, so like on my site, if you were to resize it, we'll see that this menu is, it's not in JavaScript. So it makes the site load tremendously faster. And it takes a little while, but I think that there's a lot of things that we use JavaScript for where it's just not necessary. I think properly designing your CSS and using JavaScript only where you have to be using it is extremely important. And like, so the things that Google looks at, they're looking at things like first contentful paint. It's how fast does your site, the main image of your site, load. It's basically the first time anybody can see anything on your screen. So that's one of the things where if someone sees a blank screen or stuff still loading, that's definitely going to hurt conversion and hurt people from staying and increase bounce rate. The speed index is another thing. It's pretty weighted heavily. It's 10% of the weight overall. Basically, you're looking to have a speed index that's under 4.3 seconds. But I think with Hugo, from what we can see on the scores that this site produces, I mean, you can have the whole entire site load in 1.1 seconds. So, why not achieve and try to do that? Because the faster it's going to load, the better it's going to perform. And all of these specific things play into it. But for example, the cumulative layout shifts. If you have images that aren't sized properly, the browser has to actually resize those images. So using something like source set will allow the browser to choose the proper image for the screen, which increases load speed. Time to interactive. I've tried out a lot of the different hosting companies for static sites, and I've found that all of them do a pretty good job in terms of displaying your website very quickly. I've done Cloudflare pages. I've used Amplify. I've also used the Google Cloud Platform. So any of these companies, and then there's a bunch out there. There's Vercel. Any of those companies are extremely good choices to host your static site. GitHub pages. I mean, I think that there's going to be a huge shift to people using static sites over a traditional CMS. One of the most popular ones. Total time blocking matters. This has to do, the thing that I saw when I was optimizing the site was JavaScript. If you have JavaScript, it's going to slow down the site. Any requests that you're putting out where it has to grab, let's say you're using it for fonts. You should always load your own and host your own fonts because it will load much, much faster. Any requests that you're putting out where you're saying, all right, you need to load this script, it's much slower because you're dependent on another server rather than depending on your own server. And so it's an important thing that I think that most people miss. Most people, they want the easy way. They want to use somebody else's icon set. And, let's say millions of people are using that icon set and the server slows down or it gives an error response. Well, that's going to affect your page speed and total loading time. Switching gears to, performance is, probably the largest aspect of Google page speed that they look at. But, designing your site for accessibility for people who could be colorblind, people who are deaf, I think it's really important. And I think a lot of sites don't do it. I don't think that it's that much more difficult to include, and think about people who have disabilities and include that into your design. And so, they look at, your keyboard test. Are the people using a keyboard when they're viewing your site? Screen reader test. Your website needs to be truly responsive. If it's not truly responsive, there's people who need to zoom in more or zoom out more. Colorblind. So color blindness is an interesting one, because when a lot of people build their sites, they think that certain colors will work, and they work if you're not colorblind. I've heard that some of the colors, when they're blended together, it just looks like mud. So it's really nice to have a tool like Google where it will go through and tell you, all right, these colors don't work and you should choose different colors. That's also a major thing for background and foreground contrast, because if you've got an image up and it has the color scheme where that colorblind people cannot see it, it's definitely, it's gonna they're gonna bounce out of your site. They're not gonna continue. Another thing, so the SEO audit. So I found that was very cool in Hugo. When I first, was talking to my friend who referred me and said, hey, you should use Hugo. I started out and I was like, do you mean that I'm going to have to rebuild every single plugin and every single thing that I had? And the answer was yes. I had to rebuild all of the plugins. But when you start to look at them, they're not that difficult to build. And do you really need, every single aspect of the plugin? There's a lot of bloat in plugins, and the more plugins you have on a site, the slower it will be. I don't know if you're familiar with WordPress, and the more plugins that you had, the slower the site was. So basically going through, you can, declare variables, call them for the titles, and just properly setting up your meta tags is really, really important, especially for SEO. And I think Hugo, it gives you a lot of flexibility on how you can improve your meta tags, your titles, your descriptions. You can basically set up perfect meta descriptions, where that it'll help you on the SEO score. Best practices. So this was interesting. Obviously, like I said, you want to properly size your images, but you'll avoid JavaScript for it to load quickly. But the content security policy, I think, is an interesting one, because when I originally was using it through Hugo, I had it in a meta tag, and Google had an issue with it where they were saying that you should be using it not in a meta, in basically a header. And so I actually use Cloudflare pages to host my site. And so you can create a Cloudflare worker where you declare your security policy. And that's actually how I was able to score A pluses on my security, which I think is important. I think Hugo it's built so it's going to be more secure than, let's say a traditional CMS, just because you're serving the pages on the edge, on the cloud. So there's not really any back and forth with servers communicating. It's basically serving a static version of your site. So I think that in combination with Hugo, if you set up your headers properly, I think that you create, one of the most secure sites, you could have. And I think that, in this day and age, it's very important.
Yeah. And just on that point, those headers are really important, that you're site can't be used to inject or do something nasty to the user's browser. So it's not only the server security, it's also your viewers security, and adding those headers means you're doing the right thing and protecting the visitors to your site.
I mean, some of the issues that I had with adding the headers was interesting, because you really have to know what your page is doing. So like if you're displaying JavaScript, you have to declare what your JavaScript is doing, where it's coming from. So like if you were just to use, like, for example, if I gave my header to everybody, it might not be perfect for every single website out there. So this definitely took me a while to figure out and get it right. But I think that most, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that most providers will give you an option to do something like this. I
Yeah,
don't
and
think,
if they don't, they should.
yeah, because I think that it took me a while, and when I figured it out, I was pretty dang happy, because you know that report on Lighthouse completely went away, and I was like, okay, now I'm only getting where it's now only have a few other things to fix, and even then, I don't know if you can fix everything in Lighthouse. I think that it would be really amazing to do it.
Yeah, I mean, getting to hundreds alone is a huge achievement.
Yeah. But that's pretty much everything that I had to talk about today on just, setting up your website properly, and building it for speed, and also building it securely. And everything that I have is on a GitHub repository. Like I said, I'll send that out in the chat. And it's free to anybody. The only disclaimer is some of the images, if you're going to use it, just change the images, because they're copyright protected from 123 RF.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing all those tips today, Scott. There's a lot of very relevant stuff here for the Hugo community. I think all of this stuff should be top of mind, particularly when you're handcrafting a website from scratch. Yeah, why not go that extra mile and get the 100 out of 100 Lighthouse score?
Yeah, I mean, I think Google Lighthouse does a really good job telling you kind of what you need to be doing. But I think that, like I mentioned, the biggest ones, I mean, those are, you really need to pay attention to those. Like the resizing images is gigantic, and Hugo has that image processing. That's, I think it's amazing.
Yeah. What was the trickiest part of getting to 100? Was there a couple that you were stuck on for a long time?
So the trickiest part, I would say the images. I mean, I still haven't figured out. I know that there's a way to use a partial where I could process all of my images, where, anytime I upload an image, it's basically processed into all the different versions, where the browser gets to pick which one at that point using source set.
Yeah, well, let's ask that to the chat. Does anyone know how to process a whole lot of images on Hugo and just have that kind of seamless, whether that's through a partial or some other functionality? One tool that I use very frequently, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Image Optim. It's on Mac. I'm not sure if it's on other operating systems. Okay. But with something like a JPEG, there's a lot of times a lot of metadata on the image that doesn't actually help it render. For example, you take a photo on your phone, it says, hey, I was taking on iPhone X. This is my latitude and longitude that it was taken. This is the time. A lot of metadata. This is the focal lens that was used. But the user doesn't need that information, and it just adds extra bulk. And then in the image itself, there's often a lot of optimizations you can do that don't impact the quality of the image, or at least what you can see to the eye, but you can make the file size a lot smaller. And so how it works is you can just drag an image into Image Optim. It will run all these optimizations and then spit out an image that's sometimes 30 or 40% smaller. And you put it side by side and it will look exactly the same. So that's a tool that I highly recommend. It works for JPEGs, PNGs, I think GIFs and SVGs. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, that's a cool tool too.
That's fantastic. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Used to saying use a dictionary for your partial variables to make it multi-purpose. Yes, you might need to post some code there, but that
yeah, I was trying to pass dict through it, and the URL would come through, but the partial then would not process. For some reason it wouldn't process the image properly. I think I was I don't know. I mean, I'll have to put that up on Hugo's forum.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of answers there. One other chat, I'm not sure if you caught Chris's talk at the end of yesterday for HugoConf. He had a short code that did a lot of image processing, so there might be something there as well.
Yeah, that's what I found. There's a blog written by Laura Kahlbag.
Okay.
And she has a pretty good it's for short codes. The thing that I just haven't been able to do is convert the short code where I can use it from a partial in a layout. So it's definitely on my to-do list.
Yeah, no, that would be a big breakthrough. Just something else from the chat. Jan's saying please look at AVIF image formats and WebP. I'm not actually familiar with AVIF.
It's for PNG images.
Okay.
So it goes through and basically optimizes the ping images too.
Got it. Yeah, I think one interesting thing from Chris's talk yesterday is I think this was he has a plugin that you can load it into Hugo, and for an image, it will downsample it. So it will make the image way smaller and then blow it back up again. So it will look really blurry and pixelated. And when you load the page, that will show. So it's very fast to load that, obviously, because it's small file size. And then once the page is loaded, then it will start downloading the higher quality image. So it's trying to give you that fast page load while allowing for a higher quality image later. Yeah, it looked like there was a bit of setup, but if you can get that going, you start to get the best of both worlds, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and he, I think he got the idea from Facebook. They're all over trying to do that, just give a good first impression blurry image and then load in high quality later.
It's interesting. Like I've never heard of that.
Yeah, what accessibility, let's say for that keyboard interaction, what did you add to the site to make it?
So basically, so that type of stuff is having proper titles for not only like your menu, but also your images, for your alt tags. It's basically if you were to cover your eyes and think about how that page would read out, and does it make sense? Is it written for people, or are you just stuffing keywords in there, right? So you got to think about, okay, if I wasn't able to see the page and it was being read back to me, how would it read? How would it come out? Would it make sense? Would it be a website that someone who couldn't see, would it be something that it would make sense in terms of your menu titles, your image titles, just basically going through the whole page?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I've tried using one of those screen readers before and doing that blind test, and yeah, it does take a while to get used to being able to do that, but it really makes me appreciate how important all those tags and things are, because if you don't have them, you have no hope of navigating a website and being able to use that whatever it is, use that website. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Yeah, anything else we want to say to the community, the chat?
I'm sorry.
We're just wrapping
Anything
up
else?
here. Yeah, you want to?
Just thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be at the first Hugo conference. So I hope my talk was helpful. And if you guys have any questions, you can always find me on Twitter. It's Reilly Media, Reilly.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Scott.